Hello, I am Dyslexo Boy. This series is about practical advice on how to overcome dyslexia and ADHD while studying in medical school. In this video, I'll be talking about tools to help you revise. Specifically, I'll cover making flashcards, using question banks, and reviewing lectures for revision. In order to put things into your long-term memory, as we talked about in the last video, you're going to have to use spaced repetition. This involves being exposed to information in a cyclical fashion. If you've retained the information, the interval of exposure increases. If not, it resets back to the shortest time. Now, this could be possible to police yourself. However, there are lots of programs that will do it for you. The one I personally use is Anki. It's free, highly modifiable, but does require you to learn how to customize its settings to best suit your needs. There are already a lot of very good guidance on YouTube about how to understand and set up Anki. I'm not going to cover that here. Instead, I'd like to talk to you about how to organize your flashcard decks. Now, I've seen a lot of other students fall into the trap of creating one big deck that has an incredibly high number of new cards and repeats per day. As they accumulate new cards, this becomes unwieldy as they're still going over old topics. Because the deck size is so big, they don't complete all of their repeats for that day, and as a result, cards and concepts get easily lost. In other words, the tool quickly becomes inefficient. So to combat this, you want to be able to have a low number of new cards in your deck. This will mean that you can get through them in your hour of revision time. I'd recommend about 25 to 30 total new cards, and double that number in repeats, about 50 to 60 per day. I do want to stress that you can put new cards into the deck. I usually have a couple of hundred cards in at least one deck, but the cards that it will be showing you each day, the number of new cards you'll be exposed to, should be very low. This way, if you do develop a backlog, it will never become so dire that things get lost, or that you don't have a chance to catch up. I'd also suggest splitting up the module into several subject-based subdecks. So I've got an example here. There you go. So my course was based around systems. So for the Abdo module, I would have subdecks based on anatomy, physiology, histology, pathology, pharmacology, and clinical skills. And each of these subdecks would only have 5 cards in, new, and 10 cards on repeat per day. This leads to the module having 30 new cards and 60 repeats, as I was talking earlier. As you progress through the year, you'll create a new deck for each module. You should go over your current deck every day and review previous modules on alternate days. So for example, if I had done the cardio and rest modules previously and are currently working on Abdo, I would do Abdo and respiratory one day and then Abdo and cardio the next day. There are lots of pre-made Anki decks, and I'd encourage you to check those out. The students on my course had big Google Docs folder filled with Anki decks, and people contributed to it throughout the years. However, I should warn you that medicine changes fast, so some of these materials can be outdated. People also have a tendency to produce flashcards that are focused in areas that they personally have trouble with or are tailored to the specific ways that they learn. As a result, I'd recommend making your own flashcards if you can. To do this, I'd recommend downloading the image occlusion add-on for Anki. To make a good flashcard, you want to have an image for you to anchor in your mind. Minimal text, which you are prompted to recall, and the information has to be highly relevant as a result. For subjects like anatomy, this is easy. Have a picture of the organ and simply block out any annotations. You can do the same with diagrams, for examples of clinical signs, or radiographs for things like physiology, pathology, and clinical skills. Pharmacology was something I found more difficult. In this case, I ended up having to make text flashcards. In cases like this, I'd recommend keeping the amount of text you have to memorize to the minimum. 3 or 4 words at most. For example, if the flashcard says name ARBs, just have candesartan, losartan, valsartan on the flip side. If it's mechanisms of ARBs, angiotensin receptor blockers. Indications of ARBs, hypertension. So you're not having to recall an enormous paragraph of information. So where do you get the diagrams and images that you'll need to create these flashcards? Initially, I got my images straight from lecture slides. As I was making lecture notes in the way I described previously, I'd copy images from the slides directly into Anki and include the text as I was writing up my notes. These were useful because they were very specific to the course. However, they weren't as comprehensive as I would have liked them to have been. Eventually, I actually bought a bunch of pre-made flashcards, scanned them into my computer, and then put them into Anki. This was costly, labour-intensive, but fundamentally also very effective. In the future, I'm planning on reviewing individual resources, but for now, I want to specifically mention netters. So netters have fantastic books and flashcards on anatomy, physiology, pathology, and histology. They're filled with really vibrant images which are annotated with lots of very high yield information, and the diagrams are, as a result, perfect for creating flashcards for dyslexia. If you want to use a textbook or pre-made flashcards in Anki, I would recommend using netters. So, I mentioned earlier using question banks as well. I want to be clear, I don't mean going over exam questions, but websites like Lecturio and also I believe Osmosis have questions after each video. These questions will be stored in a large bank that will be presented to you using spaced repetition. The advantages of this form of revision is that it also allows you to practice taking single best answer style questions. You can easily rewatch the video if you get an answer wrong and need to review the material, and it doesn't require self-assessment in the way that Anki does. However, they are very text-based. Sometimes you can find yourself memorizing answers rather than concepts, and you do have to pay a fee in order to gain access to the question banks. They are useful. I wish I'd started using them earlier in my course, but I'd recommend using them either in addition to other tools like Anki, rather than instead of them, or after you've already memorized the material, maybe in the clinical phase. Finally, I want to talk about reviewing lecture notes. If you followed my previous video on learning new material, you will see that I've encouraged you to either have lectures recorded or to record your own audio notes. I'd recommend listening to any lectures you're struggling with while traveling or at the gym. This kind of repetition isn't as good as flashcards or question banks by itself. However, it is useful as an additional supplement to those tools. If you've decided not to make your own audio notes or record lectures, there are some other sources you can listen to on the go. Audible has titles like Zero to Finals and Medical School Crash Course, which I found useful. In addition, there are large numbers of medical podcasts which you can listen to. Listening to experts have a dialogue is a great way to hear concepts explained in several different ways. Finally, I'd just like to go over the fact that with dyslexia, you will be making connections as you learn new material. I've often found myself just linking concepts as they come up repeatedly in flashcards. What you need to do is make sure that you have the information in your memory already. Next time, in the next video, we'll be talking about ways to avoid distractions while you're revising. Thank you very much for your time.